All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to World History, Lesson 1b. Today we're going to be focusing on the Reformation, this is going to continue along what we started with last time, talking about the Renaissance. This is kind of what happens with the ideas of the Renaissance and how they impacted what was going on in the world of religion. Prior to this point, when you talked about religion in Europe, you talked about one religion, and that was the Catholic Church. At this point in history, we actually break where we have two major powers in terms of Christianity, one being the Catholic Church and one being the Protestant Church. The Reformation is where those two break apart. So a little review of what we talked about last time. On the first part of this lesson, we looked at the Italian Renaissance. We talked a little bit about what Renaissance means, the fact that it was a rebirth, the focusing on some of the ideals of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. We looked at how society changed, focusing more on humanism, on the role of the individual within society. We talked a little bit about the rise of city-states within that as well. We talked about the artistic Renaissance, the idea that new ideas and some new masters were beginning to come up and do different focuses in terms of what they were painting and sculpting. And we looked specifically at those masters like Michelangelo and Raphael when we were considering the Renaissance. Today we're going to be looking specifically at the Reformation. We're going to talk about what the Reformation is, where and why it began in Europe. We're going to look at the consequences of the Reformation stemming from Martin Luther. This is different than Martin Luther King, although it's the person that Martin Luther King was named after, and his 95 Theses, which were ideas that started the Reformation. And we're going to explain why religious thinkers desired to reform the Catholic Church. What was wrong with the Catholic Church that made people want to change it? So your reading for this week is as follows. It is the Reformation. It's the second part of chapter 12. It's pages 389 to 401. So that'll be the part that we're discussing here. And this presentation, along with that reading, will be part of your assignment 1b. Preview for today. What we're going to be talking about is religion on the eve of the Reformation. What did religion look like during the time frame right before the split or the breakup of Christianity? And who was this Martin Luther character? What was his story? Another guy very important named Calvin, another individual, a thinker within the Reformation, started something called Calvinism. We're going to look at the Reformation in England, move out of the continent and into England and talk a little bit about what that looks like. And finally, we're going to focus on the Catholic Reformation. What happened after the breakup of the church? How did the Catholic Church try to modify and save itself and change to be more accommodating to the people of the time? Key terms that we're going to be looking at are Reformation, indulgence, salvation, predestination, annul, and Christian humanism. So those terms will come up in your reading, and we'll be talking about them within this presentation as well. So we'll start with Christian humanism. What was the idea that started this, impacted this whole idea of breaking up the Catholic Church into two? And it really was some of the ideals that were spawned by the Renaissance, this idea of looking back at the way that the Greeks and the Romans dealt with society, the role of the individual within society, and it made people really think about the role of religion as well. So Christian humanists, people that were of this basic belief system, felt that religious change was made by the individual. It wasn't something that was done collectively by a church, but people had to make a covenant or a belief in God. And a lot of the same people felt that the Catholic Church was in need of reform. A lot of people felt that it was something that was just, corrupt. People were using it to get what they wanted. There was a lot of power involved, and so people were corrupted by the Catholic Church, and that it needed to be changed. On the eve of Reformation, so before the break between the Protestant and the Catholic Church began, as I said, many people felt that the Catholic Church had become corrupt. Many officials were focused on worldly rather than spiritual issues. A lot of times priests were thought to be focusing more on their wealth than they were on the spiritual salvation of their flock. And through something called indulgences, people could literally buy their way to heaven by making essentially a donation to the church. They could get a free pass to heaven, and a lot of people felt that that was inappropriate for churches to be granting that. So along came an individual who really broke the thing wide open. His name was Martin Luther. He was a German Catholic monk and scholar, a thinker, essentially kind of a university student, who really became disillusioned with the whole Catholic Church. Looked at what was going on, as I mentioned before, didn't like what he saw, and felt that the church needed to change. He also felt that some of the church teachings were improper, and he didn't like the whole idea of indulgences. So he at first went to the church to try to seek some changes, but he didn't get very far. And what happened after he went to the church to try to make changes, and they essentially kind of blew him off, is he sent a list of his concerns, essentially a list of his demands or his worries about how the church was going. And they're called the 95 Theses, 95 reasons why he felt something was wrong with the Catholic Church. That happened in October of 1517. And he felt that in Germany, at least, there should be a break between the believers and the Catholic Church. Catholic Church, of course, focused in Italy at this time. He felt that the German Catholic Church should change and break with the main church to kind of address some of these evils as he felt that they were. Well, essentially that didn't work really well for him, because what happened was the Holy Roman Emperor, essentially the Emperor of Germany, named Charles V, excommunicated Luther. To excommunicate someone essentially is to get rid of them, say they can no longer be part of the congregation, and he was pushed out of the Catholic Church. So he went to Germany, or returned to Germany, and set up his own church. If you can't beat him, then the best thing to do probably is just to set up your own church. So he went outside and formed his own church called the Protestant, the root word being protest, the Protestant faith. Okay, so he's protesting against Catholic teachings, so it's the Protestant church. A little bit later, in about 1536, another individual comes along. His name is John Calvin. And he takes a lot of the ideas of Martin Luther and kind of summarizes them, packages them a little bit differently, and really puts together the first belief system of the Protestant church. One of the things he felt that was important to recognize in this new church is that people are predestined to be saved by God. So you're born either going to go to heaven or going to go to hell, according to Calvin's belief. And he also felt that nothing that happened on the earth, no good deeds or evil deeds that you could do, were going to change what was going to happen to you when you died. So definitely a different view of your place in the world than with the Catholic Church. In England, most of this is happening, as you can see, in Germany and Italy. In England, though, this also starts to get some traction. It really is based on a very interesting thing that occurs. There's people in the north, the Scottish area of the English Isles, that really believe in the whole ideas that Calvin is suggesting. But it really takes something that happens with the monarch to make these changes significant in southern parts of England. And that occurs when Henry VIII wants to divorce his wife. His wife at the time could not bear a son, an heir to the throne, and so he didn't want to have her around anymore. He wanted to get a new wife that potentially could get him an heir, and so he wants a divorce. But the Pope in Italy refused to grant him a pope. The Catholic Church did not agree with the idea of divorce at that point and said, nope, you can't divorce your wife. So what he does is he essentially says, all right, there's these people that are thinking about leaving the Catholic Church. I'll do the same and set up my own church and allow myself this opportunity to divorce my wife. So he does that. He uses the sentiment of the time and breaks away from the Catholic Church and forms what's called the Church of England, or the Anglican Church. The Church of England is overseen by the king, by Henry VIII at the time. It is essentially the basic teachings of the Catholic Church are still believed within the Church of England. So it's very similar. And even today, the Anglican, or in the United States, it's called the Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Church is very similar to the Catholic Churches in a lot of ways. Future kings, after Henry leaves the throne, also move the teaching of the Church of England a little more towards Protestantism and a little further away from Catholicism. But they're very similar, like I said, even today. So what happens with all this change, people leaving the Catholic Church, concerned about the belief system of the Catholic Church? What happens within the Catholic Church itself? Obviously, it's got to affect them in some way, and it does. And there's something called the Catholic Reformation. So within the Church, the Catholic Church, they recognize the loss of members and the concern that people have, and so they decide to make their own reforms, their own internal reforms. And they meet at a place called Trent, as a council, the leaders of the church throughout Europe, the Catholic Church, and they form some new doctrines, a new belief system, and try to tighten up and refocus the energy of the church towards more focus on salvation and towards preaching towards the people, as opposed to lining the pockets of the priest and the clergy. So that's a little bit about the Reformation in Europe. You're going to read more about it in your book. Once you've had an opportunity to read the pages I recommended and also take a look at this presentation, please go ahead and get started with your assignment 1B. Thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you next time.